Welcome, crew, to What Are Your Three, a Channel 3 podcast where we take a member of the Channel 3 community, discuss 3 games of their choosing, go through some honorable mentions and some other odds and ends, to have a nice little video game discussion. I'm Dan Tucker, and with me as always is Ray, not El Ray. I'm still getting it down right. It is just Ray on the site now. I'm not even going to call you Hector. I'm going to call you Hector one of these times just to mess with you. Because I've never called you in like 3 years, Hector. Let's do this.
I'm gonna have to change all my tags to Ray now. I think this is like an official transition that I'm making over from El Ray to just Ray. Tonight's stream, our guest tonight, I'm really excited because this podcast is going to be a little different than all the others. Our guest gave us an exact theme of what she wanted to talk about, which I thought was so awesome because I get to ask questions about it. We're going to talk about uxorcist and her favorite streaming games. So welcome, uxorcist, to the chat.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
This is so cool because usually we just say, hey, just bring whatever your reason is, and usually they just tell us the games. But you said, hey, this is what I want to do. This is kind of the theme to it, and so I'm really excited about it because it's kind of a new way to ask these questions. So I want to jump right in. Game number 1 of games you love to stream is League of Legends.
Yes.
Right. This is, like I said, this is like the MOBA. Right? I mean, probably one of the first ones we're talking about on this podcast. Do you want to just explain MOBAs? Because maybe not everyone knows exactly how that concept works.
Ooh, explain MOBAs. All right, so it is a multiplayer online battle arena. That's what MOBA stands for. And essentially, it's a competitive game where you have 2 teams, and usually each team has about 5 to 6 players. And there are objectives on the map that each team is vying for. So that's really, in a nutshell, what a MOBA would be. Did you two add anything to that?
No, I'm like zero experience MOBA. So you are whatever definition you give today is going to be the official definition going forward for anyone else. So no pressure, but that's it. Wow. So why is this the first game we're talking about today?
All right, so it's really funny because my list actually started out as top 3 games I love-hate, that I have a love-hate relationship with. And the first one that came up to mind was League of Legends. And I was like, man, I hate this game. But I also love it. I play it every day. I've been playing it since like 2010. It's like almost season 1 for League of Legends. And I play with my friends almost every day. I don't know why. I don't know why. I'm seriously just sitting here thinking, like, why do I play this game? Every time I bring this up, somebody's like, but why? And I'm like, well, it's fun. Like, if you play with your friends, it's fun. If you play with a bunch of randos, that's where you start to get into the not so fun territory.
So I was going to say, when you're playing this game, do you go in kind of with a planned team of people that you're going to play with, or are you dropping in with a bunch of randoms?
If I'm lucky, I'm going in with a planned team, right? At least on those rare occasions where I haven't played League in a while and I just need to scratch that itch, I'll go in by myself. It'll be bad. And then I'll be like reminded about why I don't do this. Yeah, and then I'll just like panic message somebody, please get on League of Legends right now.
So like 13 years of playing this game, do you have kind of a set champion that you go with? Do you have a couple that you use for different situations? How do you go about choosing your character?
I have so many. That's a tough question to answer. I think the first main that I ever had, his name is Victor, and he became very, very popular from the show Arcane. I don't know if you two have seen Arcane. Yeah?
I have on Netflix, actually, because I am not very familiar, but I was told it doesn't matter. Just watch the show. It's just good regardless.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. It's a stellar show. Well, Victor is one of the characters on that show, and that was one of my first mains, and he has a very soft spot in my heart. I really, really love that champ. I can basically play him with my hands tied behind my back. So it's a champ I play when I want to relax, essentially. So I'm really, really good at Victor.
Can you play this game to relax? Because it's a highly competitive game, right? And I say this for, you know, everybody who loves Rocket League tells me it's hard to relax with Rocket League. I tell people it's very hard for me to relax playing Smash Brothers. Like, I can have fun, but it's, you know, I'm always trying because I know I can win the game. Can you relax playing this game?
I'm giggling because A lot of people would agree with you. League of Legends is not something most people would consider a relaxing game. But there's two game modes. So you have your Summoner's Rift, which is like your extreme competition, your meta game. Everybody has a lane, like that sort of deal. And then you have your ARAM, which stands for All Random, All Mid. So that is only one lane, and everybody's always engaged in team fights, usually, if you're doing this correctly. Because if you're one-on-oneing, you're doing it wrong. But I play a lot of ARAM. I don't play as much Summoner's Rift these days. I was like out of the game for 3-4 years where I didn't play Summoner's Rift, and now getting back into it, it's kind of challenging. It's really hard, and I do want to relax. So I play ARAMs just to chill. I play chill ARAMs, and everybody's always like, no such thing. No such thing as chill ARAMs. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not League of Legends. But for me, it is relaxing. I don't put a lot of like stress on it. I play for fun. The people who play with me know that it's just going to be fun. When we're doing bad at a game, we're just like, oh, it was a warm up. This one was a warm up. We'll get the next one. And I know a lot of my friends also have this rule where they like don't go to bed or they don't stop playing until they get a win. Well, we don't stop playing until we get a loss. Or like we can't end on the win. We can't end on the win, guys. We have to win. We have to end on the loss.
And those games they're not short, right? Like the length of a game, because it's so. I mean, you could be there a while.
You could be there a while. It really just kind of depends on the luck, the RNG gods. Because if you're playing Summoner's Rift, it could be Summoner's Rift is shorter these days than it was when I first started. When I first started, you could easily be playing for 50 minutes. These days, it's like a 20 to 35-minute game, Summoner's Rift, and ARAM is pretty close too. So it's kind of like an Overwatch match.
So when you're streaming this game, is there anything that the viewers help you with or is it just they're watching you hanging out with this one?
Great question.
And I say that because your streams are super interactive as somebody who's watching them. So that's all. I'm going to ask this question throughout the show tonight.
Thanks. I try my best to make it interactive. I love my community. I enjoy interacting with them, and I'm always open to backseating. So backseating is always allowed when people are on my streams, unless it's like a no spoilers allowed type of stream. But the one thing that I really suck at in League of Legends is items and item builds. And that's because it's always changing. There's always patch notes. I don't ever read the patch notes. It's been several seasons since I was serious about League of Legends. So I'm always like, okay, guys, I've got this item, that item, and that item. What should I build next? So I do depend on chat to kind of get me through those like situational awareness portions of the game. It's kind of sad if you think about it, because really having knowledge of items is what takes you from being like an advanced player to being a masterful player. And I would consider myself not quite there because I'm so weak at my item build game.
All right, on to your second game, Control, which a much more narrative game as opposed to MOBA here. So, unfortunately, 3.4 rated on Channel 3. I think this game needs your rating. That, or is this part of the love hate, or is there more love for this? You're clutching your chest, which I have concerns if you're okay. First of all, as long as you're good. So tell me about this. Is this on the love hate scale, or where are we at?
Oh no, this is a supreme love. I love Control. I don't understand why it's a 3.4 on Channel 3. I'm gonna have to go check that out. Control is a absolutely fantastic game. It's based in the Alan Wake universe. So if you like Alan Wake, you are absolutely gonna love Control. And I would even say if you're familiar with SCPs, everybody loves SCPs. Are you two familiar with SCPs?
See, now I wanted to make sure you weren't just making up an acronym on me, because that would have been really great to like sucker us in and just be like,
I was gonna ask
oh yeah, you know what? How about the WIPs? What do you think about that? And like, oh yeah, those are great. And then you're like, they don't exist. But no, so go on.
I might get you later on during this podcast. But no, SCPs, I think it stands for Secure Containment Protocol. Somebody might call me out on that. But essentially, there's this library on the internet where people have created these incredibly detailed stories about items, monsters, etc. that have been captured and contained in this facility. So those are SCPs. So if you ever hear people talking about like, oh, SCP-179, SCP-32, they're referring to that gem of the internet. And Control has like their own version of SCPs. So in Control, you have to capture and contain these specific creatures or special items and so on.
I mean, you're talking about there's a lot of like the superhero genres, the infamouses. There's like a strong using your powers vibe involved with a lot of this, but there's also like an intricate weapons customization system. So let me ask, just what is it that pulled you into this game? I mean, you already talked about, we're going to talk about Alan Wake a little later on in here. I wasn't sure if that was really spoilery with this game, talking about the Alan Wake piece of this and connections. But yeah, as you mentioned, the larger, is it Remedy? We call it video game universe, I guess, is they very clearly tease the future game involved here. And as you mentioned, a lot of the paranormal activities kind of tie back into all that. But anyway, I kind of digress just when I say, like, what brought you to this? Why did this end up on the streaming portion of it? Then I've got some other questions I'm going to get to.
Sounds good. Yeah. So don't worry, it's not a spoiler. Like, knowing that it's related to Alan Wake is not a spoiler. There is an Alan Wake DLC for Control that's kind of, put together, but it's not a spoiler for the game. I saw Control at one of the many like game showcases back before it was released, and I was like, oh, I'm really interested in Control. And that was before I even knew it was related to Alan Wake, and I just really just drawn by the strong female character and the fact that you get these powers and your powers grow with time and there's these spooky elements to it. And then finally I was like, what should I play on my stream? I don't know. I want to play something that's scary but not too scary. Because, fun fact, I love scary games, but I'm a big weenie. A huge weenie. So I was like, what can I play? I think Control is like just the right level of scariness. So that's really what drew me into it. It was a little scarier than I thought, though.
Yeah, it's less jumps. Is there as much jump scare with this? I mean, there's some horror elements to it and some creepy looking stuff, but are there the same jump scares as some of the stuff we're going to talk about in a little bit?
No, it's definitely more atmospheric, beyond tension building.
So what are your thoughts on the weapon system here? As far as like customization goes and weapons versus powers, and how do you approach a fight in this game?
Honestly, I'm struggling to even remember what the weapons were, because for the most part, I used the powers. I'm trying not to say too much about it not to get too spoilery.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do get powers, and those are just really, really strong. So you can just have an entire like power build and make it through the game.
Yeah, so you don't even have to bother with the weapons. That's what I was kind of curious about with this. But so, what's your involvement with the? You mentioned you've got the backseat gamer policy. You're open to that and kind of seeking advice. Usually, are you trying to get some guidance when approaching some of the boss fights are just crazy in this game, right? You watch some of the boss fights. You're fighting these 50-foot monsters throwing giant rocks at you and shattering boulders and throwing things back. But it's kind of crazy to watch, because watching you and some other folks is the extent of my involvement for this one. But it looks really cool, as opposed to your games are all over the place again when you come back down to some of the indies and some of the simple stuff. This is probably the most polished of the games we're going to talk about here, I think. But where's the community come in with this one?
I think specifically my friends and the people who watch my stream were really enjoying the SCP aspect of it. So we're all just like SCP nerds, and we wanted to see like where the plot line was going. So it was very story based for us, and we were asking questions as we were playing, like, what do you think this one is? What do you think that is? There wasn't the typical kind of engagement you might find, like, what should I do next? Because it was very like straight narrative, like one thing after another.
All right, so I got another question for you. So Remedy has confirmed Control 2 probably about 9 months ago. I think they admitted that it's here. I think the original designer for Control went off. He's doing his own thing now. But Control 2 is on the way. Obviously, Alan Wake 2 is due at the end of this year. Hold that piece here. Do you think we're seeing this anytime before like 2025? That's my question.
That's a good question.
Because Alan Wake's going to be 13 years by the time all is said and done between 1 and 2. But they at least announced this one. Alan Wake 2 is always just kind of lingering there after kind of some of the DLC stuff or some of the add-on stuff. But I feel like this is probably a little further along. They probably don't have to rebuild the whole thing. Like Alan Wake, that was the end of some life cycles. I don't know. I was just trying to figure out, are we going to see this thing or not?
It's a great question. I'm probably the worst, most pessimistic person to ask, because when it comes to sequels, I don't trust anybody or any company because I've been burnt so much in the past. Like, we're thinking Fallout, we're thinking Starfield, like Fable, all of these series that were like, oh, we're building
just
a game.
Getting crushed here.
Yeah, well, you see where I'm coming from. And then Alan Wake, 13 years. I mean, I'll be happy to see Control 2 when I see it, but I will not be holding my breath. That's for sure.
That's so funny. Now your question that you sent me on Channel 3 makes way more sense now. I'll be talking about Hades too, and if I was worried about it in any way. You've just been hurt too many times. That's the problem here.
That's right. That's where that's coming from. A place of trauma.
All right, so game number 3, we're on Disco Elysium, which I had to look this one up. I had never heard of it before, and the more I watched it, I'm like, I might have to get this myself. It's a detective RPG.
Yes.
All right, so give us a little summary, a little like a plot story here.
All right, so you wake up as a man. He has amnesia, so he doesn't remember who he is, doesn't remember what his name is. But you find out pretty quickly that you're a detective and you're on a case. Not only that, but you've lost your badge and you've lost your gun. You have a co-detective on your team who is the nicest individual, because honestly, if I was dealing with that, I would be gone in a heartbeat. So the whole game really revolves around like you and your partner trying to figure out A, the facets of who you are, and B, navigating this really like complex environment and political aspect to sort of solve the case that you're on. And that's what I'll say without any further spoilers.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the wildest introductions when I was watching a video. You're on a case, but you've completely forgotten about it. And my assumption is that you just got like you just got wasted the night before, and you forgot that there's someone hung themselves, and you're supposed to be investigating this case. That was just so crazy to hear. So what archetype have you used, or which detective do you use? Because that was the introduction, right? You got to pick your stats basically.
Yeah, funny story. I went into this game without having any idea about anything at all. So when I first loaded it up and it asked me like, oh, which one of these trees do you want to be in? I was like, I don't know. How does this affect the game? I have no idea at all. So I went by Fallout rules, and I mostly just picked like psych. Like give me the charm, the encyclopedia. I want to know like the facts, all of that stuff. So I went with more of like a cognitive build. So my physical was non-existent. There's a stat there called authority that was also just 0, which came into play a lot. But yeah, it was a weak build. So it was most charm.
I was gonna say you weren't gonna force anyone to answer questions or anything early on then, right? But at least if you had the encyclopedia, so at least you woke up and knew what city you were in.
Debatable.
Right? Because that was one of the things that I watched. It's like, yeah, if you pick the wrong one, you don't even know what town you're in to start the game off, and you have to figure it out.
See, that's new. That's new to me. I feel like every time I play, I find out something new about Disco Elysium. It is a massive, massive game boasting over 1 million words in the script. Like I'm telling you, we could replay this game every week for an entire year, and it would be like having a completely different experience.
So have you completed the game more than once, or have you? Oh,
I'm still in my first playthrough. I'm over 50 hours in. I think I'm getting close to the end there, but a part of me is like dragging my feet on it because I don't want to. I don't want to finish.
If you finish, will you try it again, or is it like, or do you feel like the story's set already, so there's not a real point in kind of replaying it?
I have to replay it. I don't know when I'll be replaying it, but I absolutely have to, because there's a section of the game that I completely and utterly flubbed. So my community and I, we were playing this game, and there's a section of it that's called a tribunal, and the game was like, hey, we hear something's in the air, something's going on, be prepared. And I was like, okay, and then I just like waltzed into wherever the heck this was going on, and everything went down. I'm trying to say this as spoiler free as possible. It was the major turning point of the game, and I didn't prepare. I didn't like put any armor on. I didn't check my stats, nothing. I just waltzed in there, and luckily I had some really good rolls, because in Disco Elysium, it's kind of like D&D. So you like roll dice to see if you can pass check. And I just got really lucky with my rolls and managed to survive that encounter, but lost a few people. So I'm going to have to play again and see if I can save those folks in another run.
So I'm going to ask one more question so we don't spoil anyone here, because this game, it looks super interesting. I love the art style of it. It all looks painted, which is a very, very cool way of doing a game. I'm into this stuff now, especially with Hades, or even Ori. I like these kind of artistic style games now. What skill tree do you find most important, or at least important to you? Because they have the intellect, the physique, the psych, and the motorics. So what would be what's one important one to have?
It's a good question. So there's a tree that has Inland Empire and Volition. And your Volition is really important for morale. And there are things that happen in the story where your morale goes down, and if it hits 0, you die. So by that effect, you need to have morale. So it needs to be really high for it for you to have a better game.
Ray's been raptured. This is the
Whoa.
stuff I'm talking about. We'll cut out and we'll pretend it never happened.
No worries.
I don't know what happened.
Your morale dropped to 0.
My morale dropped. Something I heard morale drops, but I don't know what happens. Now I'm on this I'm on a cliff. I ended on a cliffhanger.
You'll have to listen to the podcast.
I'm gonna have to listen to the podcast. Now I don't know what happens when your morale goes down. I assume you die, but
you
I
die.
Don't know
In fact,
sure.
you die, much like in real life.
There you go.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
pretty much it.
That was weird. I didn't do anything. Discord restarted on me.
I kind of probably have to leave this where it is because otherwise, I think I just have to leave it.
Well, I was sitting here and all of a sudden everyone froze. I looked at my other screen and Discord was restarting by itself.
Perfect example of why you need high morale.
I've never seen this happen before. Well, great time to switch off the top 3 to our honorable mention list. So these are the next 3 games, and it feels like we've now entered the horror section of this podcast here for the games that, as you say, you are terrified of, yet you are a fan of. Right, so I'm going to start with that before I even get into the game. How did you decide that, you know what, I'm going to start streaming horror games and terrify people who watch it, including me?
Ray, I really wish I could answer that question for you, but I haven't quite figured it out myself. I feel like every time I'm playing a horror game on stream, I ask myself out loud, why do I do this to myself? Why am I doing this right now? I don't know. I asked myself that very question tonight playing another horror game. I think if I had to choose, which as a UX designer, you know, when you ask people straight out, like, hey, why do you think you do this? They're going to prepare for you an answer that they, you know, think will reflect well on them, right? So there's an inherent bias in asking somebody like, hey, why do you think you do this? We're never going to know because it's an internal thing that happens subconsciously, right? But if I had to come up with an answer, kind of like if I was being asked on the podcast, I would probably say I struggled with horror games as a kid. And I really, really love them. And I also love horror movies. So me and my mom growing up, she does not love this. I used to watch a lot of horror films. So for example, I think the first one I can remember is I watched It, but not with the blessing of my mother. She caught me. She was watching it in the living room and I was peeking from around the couch and she caught me and she was like, go back to bed. So I stuck away, came back, and then hid behind the couch for the rest of the film. Couldn't sleep for like 2 days. Also, now I'm afraid of clowns. But yeah, that's another story for another time. But essentially, just I love horror films. I love horror stuff. And here I am, continuing to scare the wits out of myself for some reason.
Yeah, it's going to be really happy that we got a movie reference in. That's his goal, to talk about movies in every single game podcast that we do.
I'm just trying to figure out where this branch veered off because you really could have gone into stealth games while you were at it. I don't know. This could have been a Metal Gear discussion instead, but
yeah, that was not the last film I snuck into for sure.
All right, first game. So first game on our horror trip here is Inscription, which is a deck building game, which are always fun. Deck building games are great, but it's known for its story. So let's talk about that.
Yes, Inscription has an amazing story. I picked it up on a Steam summer sale. It was probably the first game I ever completed on stream. So I'm really, really proud of that because I don't play card games. I don't play deck builders. Everybody's like off playing Marvel Snap. And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know how to play Marvel Snap.
We don't need to catch strays in here, okay?
But yeah, Inscription is a card game with a spooky element to it. So I was like, what is something scary that I could like, dip my toes into that wouldn't be so bad? And I was like, oh, a card game. That can't be scary. Like a card game? Yes, I'll play this scary card game. But it definitely got me a couple of times. It has a lot of like ambiance and tension, and amazingly really turned me on to card deck building games. I didn't think I could do it, and I tried my best and I beat that game, and it was a lot of fun.
So it doesn't only have. It's not only just the deck building and the card games. There's puzzles in between the battles. Is that how that works? What do these puzzles look like?
There are secrets, I'll say that. So when you first go into the game, you're in a cabin, and it has a very much like escape the room kind of aesthetic. You are trapped, so you surely do want to escape, and there are certain things you can do with interacting with items and things like that. However, cliffhanger, I will say that is not the only room you will be in for the rest of the game.
As you've beaten the game,
Yes,
right?
yes,
You've
it's
beat it.
amazing.
Is it something that you'll play again, or was this was a story and we're gonna move on to different games now, kind of thing?
Probably will replay the main story at some point, but they also have a mod called Casey's Mod where you can continue to play, let's see, the first part of that game as many times as you like. And it's harder and it's still like a good deck builder. Haven't beaten Casey's Mod yet, so I play that every now and then whenever I'm feeling nostalgic for Inscription.
All right, on to the next game, which I have to introduce from the admin alert you sent through requesting this game to be added by writing playing I'm on observation duty. And I tried to translate, what does that mean? That's great, that's what you're doing right now. But, oh, no, wait, okay. Oh, okay. So I described this one because Ray and I beforehand were chatting, and sure enough, exactly what you described about Disco Elysium and the D&D features of that one, explicitly part of the conversation beforehand about Disco Elysium. This one I described as horror where's Waldo? Jump scare where's Waldo? I don't know if that is that, based on your reaction. I think I crushed it. Is that
I thought it was creepy. Spot the difference. That was my title for it.
Two really good metaphors, I would say. Yeah, that pretty much hits the nail on the head.
Before we do anything else, though, I do have to say, for anybody who hasn't, go watch the video you attached to your review, because that probably that captures this as well as anything. But you're seeking anomalies, and probably the spot the difference to identify the ghost activities. What's your ideal playing situation? Do you play this one off stream or just on stream? Is probably my first question.
I play this strictly on stream because I cannot keep my poop in a group, and I would not be able to do that by myself. So there is some aspect of not being alone when I stream these kinds of horror games that like really help me persevere and get through it. This is one of those games.
So what's the biggest heart monitor jump? Yeah, you talked earlier. Can you talk to us a little bit about that setup you have there on your stream?
Yeah, sure. So I do have a heart rate monitor. It's brand Cuspo. Very cheap if anybody's looking for a heart rate monitor. And essentially, I only wear it when I'm playing horror games, which is like 50% of the time. And oh man, this game gets my heart rate going, but not as much as the next game on the list.
The next game's psychotic. We're gonna get to the next game in a minute, but this one there's a snap of the rubber band back and forth between these two games, or like opposite ends of the spectrum. But we're gonna get back to that.
Yeah, but this one does make my heart jump. There are jump scares in I'm on observation duty, but they're very tame. However, if you are focused looking for anomalies, yeah, it's gonna get you. It's gonna get you.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of there was like that old YouTube viral video back when YouTube first started of like, oh, watch this car drive down the road and the zombie jumps in. That's all this game does, because you start kind of like, you're focusing in, you're looking over here, and then something just flashes, jumps to the screen at you, and they got you. Have you Go ahead, sorry.
Good metaphor. I was just gonna say another good metaphor.
So have you just done the first one so far? Have you branched in? I think there are 5 total at this point.
Yeah, I'm on to the second one. I was playing the second one tonight, trying to get to that third one. So I have a little rule for myself. Like, as long as I can beat one of the 2 maps, each game seems to have about 2 maps, I can move on to the next one. I'm not quite there with the second one, which is Timothy's Revenge, but I'm getting pretty close.
Is 2 where we get into color? Because I was also kind of curious about the difference between the more black and white environment versus like injecting some color, if there's any change, because it seems like they kind of backed up a little bit or kind of de-resed a little bit going forward as they get into the later games. I don't know what your thoughts are about if that's made a difference on kind of bringing you into the environment or sucking you in at all or something like that.
Interesting. So for observation duty too, the one of the biggest differences I've seen is that they have more high res textures and 3D objects and things like that. So it's really funny because on the one hand, first the second game, they have one map which has these really nice, pristine 3D environments, and then they have this 2D map which looks like if dial-up internet looked like an apartment, it would look like this map.
So I was trying to figure out if like the uncanny valley comes into this because I felt like the vibe of the first game sucks you in more in disconnecting with reality. That was kind of the vibe that I felt for it, and it felt like when they tried to put a little more effort into it, it kind of lost a little bit. Just because you're like, okay, it felt gamier to me as opposed to looking at like old CCTV video, or maybe that was just my feel for it. Like they got to go back, and I think they do, but. Yeah.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but the first game does have kind of a different flavor to it. The second one is almost slapdash together when you view it from that perspective. Yeah.
It wasn't long in between these. I mean, they bang these games out. This is not like a 3-year development cycle. They're one of the tightest gaps was maybe 9 or 10 months between two of the releases when they were coming out here. So they do move along. Now, granted, you're also not talking about like, again, we'll come to the next game right after this, but it's a little simpler and a little more of an indie vibe than say the Unreal Engine build of the Demonologist that we're gonna get into. So I don't know, I may be editorializing a little bit too much here with this one, but but it is, you make it entertaining to watch this game is probably the best way to describe this as opposed to playing it. It's just your reactions really sell this one.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a lot of fun to stream. I couldn't get it done without the community, to be honest. Especially I have this one friend, his name's Oyster Sauce. He's also a streamer, and he is amazing at picking out the anomalies. I mean, between me and chat, teamwork makes the dream work. Because if I was playing this by myself, I don't think I would be playing number 2, let me tell you what.
All right, so let's move on to the far more aggressive Demonologist. The newest game of the bunch that we're discussing here before we get to the future. This one's, I think, March, and it might still be early access. I'm not sure exactly where. Early access can last like 7 years now. Ask Baldur's Gate. That's been like a 10-year early access. I don't know, whatever. Phasmophobia is probably the best comp here. You're gathering information. You're doing a little bit of that ghost busting observation. But as I mentioned, as we were talking about, I'm on observation duty. An entirely different build because you're looking at what's like that indie game vibe versus, oh no, we've got the Unreal Engine. We have aggressive jump scare. Like these are not like, oh, little jump scares. These are aggressive jump scares. I think, I don't want to say abusing sound, but they are using sound against you with this one. But tell me about this one. How did we go with the Demonologist?
Well, okay, it's really, first off, interesting that you mentioned sound because I'm on observation duty. I keep thinking to myself, like, wow, they're really not using sound at all. But Demonologists, it's almost like an overuse of sound.
Yeah, I'm not a horror movie guy, and again, sorry, Ray, I'm taking a detour. I'm getting to a point here. I need to use a metaphor, but yeah, with horror movies, yeah, you get some of those. I'm not trying to call the Demonologist like a cheap scare, but there are those movies where like they just throw noise at you and like that's a jump scare. Like that's not actually scary. You just made a noise, and I reacted to the noise. Demonologists, like they're doing more, and they're really sucking you in, and they're very aggressive though with going from quiet things and like. You walk up and you see a ghost and it's just kind of staring there and you're like, okay, fine, I'll bite. Let me turn and see. And then you turn and something jumps out at you, but it like shrieks with the violin and the noise and the crashing or whatever. So again, a much more aggressive approach to the horror as opposed to observation duty. I feel it's like a lot more subtle. But anyway, how do you handle this one by comparison?
Not well. So back to the heart rate monitor. I mean, I have reached over 107 or 110 on the heart rate monitor playing Demonologist because it is just that freaking spooky. In fact, the joke on Demonologist is that it's Phasmo all grown up, like this Demonologist does such an incredible job of creating atmosphere where Phasmo doesn't. So I love Phasmo. I think there's definitely a place in the world for Phasmo. I think one of the things they could do better is some of the things that Demonologist does right now, which is, you know, building that kind of tension. So in Phasmo, after you play it as much as I did, okay, I got to like level 300. I played a metric butt ton of Phasmophobia. You just know when it's coming. Everything's planned out. The ghosts move this way, and there's really nothing else between like cups being thrown, doors slamming, and then the ghosts walking around, right? Well, in Demonologist, you have the introduction of sound and voice and all of these things. So it's just kind of like really building on the concept of Phasmophobia and then making you lose your poop, right? You just can't keep your poop in the group playing Demonologist. I think they've really nailed that concept. It's incredibly scary. I highly recommend it for anybody looking for a good time.
So was this a pretty new start for you? I think you had requested it maybe in the last couple of weeks, and was that just when you started it? How far are you? You think you're going to continue on your journey with this one?
Hell yeah. This is like one of the few games that I feel scares me, but I can still kind of put on my big pants and like walk through it. I have Phasmo to thank for that, right? So I've had like all this training in Phasmo. I'm now applying it here in Demonologist. So I feel like, oh, it's not too scary, and then something really freaks me out. But again, it's way more fun with friends. It's way more fun if you're streaming it on Twitch, right? Because if you have all these people watching, it gets a little less scary. But yeah, I definitely will be playing a lot more Demonologist.
I think you just have to just start playing in the dark, not on stream. Just lock yourself in the basement and turn the lights off and just go for it.
Already can't handle it. My heart rate's like already going through the roof. We're
just,
at 76.
Just the thought of it. All right. Well, I mentioned, and we've danced around this one a couple of times here. We're going to move on to your future game that you're looking forward to. We're here to talk 13 years later. Alan Wake 2 is finally coming before the end of this year. I don't think we have a date still, but that intersection of David Lynch and Stephen King meeting in the Twilight Zone. We're coming back in again, like you mentioned, kind of a greater Remedy verse coming in here. So after all this time, what's brought you back to Alan Wake?
Wake is a really nostalgic game for me. I played it when I was pretty young, whenever it came out, probably high school, and I wanted to be a writer when I was in high school. I was like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a writer. And Alan Wake was a writer. So, we had those two similarities together, right? And I love horror games. So both of these things really came together neatly for me in Alan Wake. And I just absolutely loved it. I ate up all the like writery, literary references, you know what I mean? And then the ending was kind of a bit of a cliffhanger. So I've been waiting 13 years for the cliffhanger to get resolved, right? And then you play Control. So Control is really what wet my whistle for Alan Wake 2, because there are things in there where you're like, isn't that from Alan Wake? Isn't this also from Alan Wake? And you like making these connections. So I'm very, very interested to see how they're going to put Control into Alan Wake now that they've put Alan Wake into Control.
Yeah, less subtle by the end of Control also. I mean, it's outright aggressive of just like, oh no, here it is. Yeah, this is what it is. It's coming.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? The flashlight mechanic weakening, trying to conserve your power. Like, how do you balance all of that? Where does this fall on the horror scale for you?
I'm gonna go with pretty high, Dan. I feel like the flashlight mechanic was incredibly innovative for its time, and not being able to kill things makes it scarier, right? And I think that's exactly what that flashlight accomplishes. It's like, oh, you can kill it, but first you need batteries and you need a flashlight. It's super scary. It's taking like Luigi's Mansion to a whole other level.
So I'm trying to figure out with this one. I've talked a lot about vibes with some of these games, and I feel like that's where the horror games live, right? In vibe country. And I feel like there's, just from looking at the videos of the second game here, and obviously you're talking about a different character, a different, you're mixing protagonists here. You're talking about somebody who's probably a little bit more in control as opposed to Alan Wake, who's completely losing his mind. And you talk about these events and things like that. But anyway, I'm rambling just to say, I feel like there's a different color palette. I feel like there's a different vibe for this game versus the first one. What are you thinking? What are you expecting? What are you waiting to see with this? Is ultimately the question I'm trying to get to after all of my rambling there.
100%. It's definitely a different vibe. I think Alan Wake was more of an RPG that had on the sidelines some thrilling aspects. Whereas I think Alan Wake 2 is going to be a full-on horror game. I think they're going to change that vibe and they're going to bring in that audience.
Yeah, a little more Resident Evil. I didn't want to say it, but fine.
Yeah.
Since now that you like danced around, I'm just gonna say there's a little bit more later Resident Evil with this, I think.
I agree. I'm trying to think what else it might bear well with, but Resident Evil is probably a good comparison.
All right, now on to a question from the Channel 3 history books that we are going to pick for you to discuss here. This is the one we don't warn you about. And the quest I'm going to ask you to revisit for us here today. We've talked before. Netflix has a subscription service. We're not talking about movies, Ray. Just chill for a second. I'm getting there, okay? But one of the things that's often not mentioned with Netflix, they have an entire game section. And some time ago, we asked for everybody to recommend a Netflix game. And you, in fact, did that for us. But can you recommend a Netflix game for us here today?
I know exactly what game I recommended in that quest. And that game was Oxenfree. Oxenfree is probably the first horror-related aspect game that I was able to beat from start to finish. And that is the game that made me believe, like, hey, you know what? I could probably play more horror games. I could probably do this. You know, when I was younger, I played Silent Hill, never finished it. Nope, couldn't keep the poop in the group. I just, with a lot of games when I was a kid, I could not finish horror games, right? So it was like a community thing between me and my friends in the neighborhood. We'd meet up, we'd take turns, and we'd try to get through it. Oxenfree is one of those games that really freaked me out, but wasn't too scary. So I would call it like Fright Light. So if you're looking for a Fright Light game that is interesting, has a really good narrative, and has a branching structure, I would definitely recommend Oxenfree. And you can play it on Netflix, which is, pure mind-blowing.
Yeah, it was a game I think they picked up after the fact and added in there. Say, hey, the subscription's there. You may as well use it. Was this a PC play for you or a stream play or anything like that?
I played it on PlayStation.
See, yeah. I didn't even know. Now I gotta check this out. I did not even know you could do that.
Good. And if you end up liking it, they're coming out with Oxenfree 2 sometime soon.
I think I added that to the. I want to say I added that to the library, so it is there to add to your games you're looking forward to. So have at it, people.
100%. Steam Summer Sale. Steam Summer Sale plug. I swear Steam should just start paying me.
Yeah, by the time this drops, it's going to be in the middle of it. We're going to have a watch team sent over you to make sure you're okay. Been expressing concern as this is arriving, so I think you're not going to be this coming week, but the week after, so we'll be thoughts and prayers for you in the meantime.
Thank you. The wallet really needs it.
And the last question we ask everyone, what has been your favorite feature on Channel 3 so far?
This question was so difficult for me because I'm in love with more than one feature on Channel 3. And I was like, man, why you guys make me do this? Especially with the favorites. You guys were like, give me your 3 favorite games of all time. And I was like, no, I can't. So this was another challenging question for me. I'm going to have to go with, like, if you put a bunch of pressure on me and you had to say you can only pick one feature, I'm going to go with the lobbies, like the chat rooms in Channel 3. I don't really feel like I've seen anything like that. Like Facebook has community groups, and we all know how much community groups suck.
Oh, God, what a mess they are.
Oh, for real. But over here in Channel 3, you get specific lobbies for games, almost any game really, that's in the library, right? And not only that, it's already made for you. Whereas over here in Facebook, you have to like make your own community group, advertise it, right? So I logged into the Disco Elysium lobby and I was just like, nobody's talking about this game, and just kind of started like a quick discourse. But mostly I use it for lurking, not gonna lie. I just like go through, I lurk in the lobby, I lurk in the bugs section. I know all about Channel 3 bugs. I lurk in the Marvel Snap. I don't play Marvel Snap. I just like read through and see it, and I can see how it's going to be really, really useful for like pickup games, right? When you don't want to play randos on League of Legends, you go to the lobby and you're like, hey, who wants to play an ARAM? So I really love that feature.
Jay Davies is gonna love that answer because he's like one man working his butt off on that chat section. And it's been fun. I'm really happy to it, and I love its per game. Every once in a while, I put in a random game and I see, oh look, people have been chatting about this game here. So I mean, it's always fun to see.
Yeah, and that's how I met Froggy, because Froggy was playing Hades, and they were like, man, I don't know if I can do this, and I was like, Froggy, you got this. You can do it. You can do it.
Oh
I'm
my
just going to
God,
take this opportunity to be.
I don't think I'm in the Hades chat. This is
Get in there.
this is a huge mistake for me because I love that game.
I thought you were the Hades chat.
I maybe I am. You know, I have so many chats pinned because I'm always like I'm bouncing around. I gotta go back and check the Hades chat. Why is it not popping up for me?
I try and
love that
avoid
game.
being overly negative, but I'm going to unload on the Facebook stuff here because they annoyed me with that group thing because they spent so much time saying, like, "Oh, come build a group. This is going to be the place to do it," and then they yanked all of the benefits out from underneath of it in an attempt to manipulate and monetize everything. Not going to have to worry about that abuse over here.
No, and it's pretty targeted. Whereas in community on Facebook groups, people just come in there and they promote themselves, which always sucks and takes up space. But here, because we're all centered on games, each one of these lobbies, each one of these chat groups, they're just here to talk about Hades, right? Like, we're just here to talk about Hades. Are you playing Hades? Cool. Let's talk about other things about Hades. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it builds organically from there because that's when you start saying, like, okay, now I see uxorcist, talks about plays Hades. Let me see what else they do. And then, like, hey, they find their way over to your stream. I mean, that's how this stuff happens organically without having somebody just coming in and spamming a comment. And it's all for the love of the games.
Exactly. That's what I like best.
All right, with that, we've made it to the end of another What Are You 3 podcast. You Exorcist, thank you so much for being our guest today. You can find the podcast at c3.gg/podcast, dropping every Wednesday morning at 3:33 a.m. Eastern on all the major platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. I am Ray. Dan Tucker puts this all together, and our executive producer, Joel Willis. Have a good day, everybody.